Maggie, how did you come to teach at RISD?
I had been working in Philadelphia during the time that I was in graduate school and was getting rather bored with office work as a predicament that one gets into after graduate school, and was sitting in a dentist's office reading a progressive architecture magazine with the fervent attention that one gives to magazines only in dentist's offices. And I had gotten through all of the photographic, photogenic even, architectural projects that sort of float sightless through such magazines. And my usual indignation as a landscape architect had reached a certain limit and got to the want ads. And there was nothing left to read. And so I was reading the want ad for a teaching position in Providence, Rhode Island. And I said, well, that's a place I've always wanted to visit. I've always wanted to go to New England. And this might be a free trip to Providence. Plus the ad sounded in some ways too good to be true. I mean, it didn't sound like anything that could actually come of it, and that's fine, because teaching was something that I wasn't at that point actually committed to do, except perhaps as an interim sort of break between office jobs. And the ad called for someone who had a master's degree in architecture, a master's degree in landscape architecture, and could teach passive solar design, highway design, natural resource assessment, and occasionally art history. So I said, this sounds like me, because I had undergraduate degrees in English, history, and art physics, or the equivalent. And so I sent off a letter of interest. And Will Yoder was the head of the search committee. Simultaneously, having written this ad at the behest of the head of architecture, Rodolfo Machado, the head of landscape architecture, Michael Everett, and the dean, Warren Luther, who also, I guess, will be interviewed later as part of this series, also thought it was an entirely implausible ad and was convinced they would never find anyone who fit this description. So simultaneously, he and I were believing that this thing was totally impossible. But in fact, I did get hired. And I decided that I was going to teach for 2 years. I decided that that would be just the right amount of time to cleanse myself of one kind of office experience and one living situation in Philadelphia, and be prepared to move on to something else. But I got hooked, basically, and ended up teaching eventually for 18 years. Primarily because of the students, I must say. I definitely got hooked on teaching. But that's at least how I initially got intrigued.
Wow.
And
so RISD got under your skin
yes.
And sort of stayed there for many, many years.
Well, and I came here for $10,000 less than I'd been earning, so I realized that it was a commitment which was not economically reasonable, which also, I guess, appealed to me as well. But,
well, there must have been a lot of other things that sort of appealed to you about RISD. Was it the subject that you taught and things of that sort? I mean, what subjects did you teach, and how did they change and evolve over the years?
Well, the first year, I taught 7 subjects. I taught 7 courses, essentially those that were normally assigned to virtually everybody who happened to be on sabbatical during my first year. Colgate Searle was on sabbatical, Will Yoder was on sabbatical, and so I got pretty much the full assembly of technical courses, 7 courses. I taught heating, ventilating, and air conditioning to 100 reluctant architecture students in an unair-conditioned room. I taught highway design to landscape architects in sort of advanced engineering course, you know, trigonometry in the landscape. I taught 1 winter session studio, actually, which was a real treat. And I taught ecological assessment and a whole array of technical subjects the first year. And the way I survived, I had actually no special expertise or education in technology. I mean, I was a garden variety, as you might say, architect or landscape architect with a sort of general master's level education. But the way I managed to teach all of these hardcore technical subjects was that I made very good friends with Diane Sanborn at the Copy Center. And I acquired very rapidly a large library in these subjects. And I would essentially every day gather the pertinent sections from about half a dozen books on the subject of the next day's lecture. I would take them to the Copy Center at the break of dawn and leave them in a bag hanging from her door. And then I would go teach. And then at the end of the day, which turned out to be about 7 in the evening, I would walk up the hill. I always felt somehow that one should walk, you know, down the hill at night and up the hill in the morning. But anyway, I would walk down to teach. And I would then deliver the information and answer the questions and walk up the hill at the end of the day, collecting from the copy center all the copies Diane had made. I would stare at the walls for about an hour. I would walk the dog, and then I would sleep from 8:30 to 10:30. Then I would get up and lay out Post-it notes with the outline for the day's lecture on the living room floor and divvy up all of the copies, you know, that had all the information to be dispensed the next day. And would then create these incredible sort of paste-up lectures. They were wonderful, these collages where I'd ask the essential questions and then I would get all of these experts' opinions. So this was the first year, which was teaching, as I say, 7 courses on hardcore technical subjects. And having survived that with great help from Colgate and Will, who were not supposed to be around, but would come in occasionally and, you know, and give me advice. I actually began after about the first 3 or 4 years of teaching technical subjects into teaching history and theory, which is actually what I did have a stronger background in. So at this point I began to realize that one of the wonderful things about RISD was that one really was rather free as a faculty member potentially to migrate among very specific subject areas within a particular department or field. And so at this point I was really beginning to teach the history and theory courses, which probably were more specific to my interests and also, you know, more particular to my background in art history and that sort of thing. And having, of course, spent 2 years living this sort of monastic lifestyle based upon intense organization of technical material, I decided that I probably had to teach a while longer to justify the investment of time retrospectively. So I think that's probably the other reason I taught.